The rusty hinges of the barn door groaned in protest as Jake Harrison pushed it open, sending a flock of startled sparrows fluttering into the morning sky. A shaft of sunlight cut through the dusty air, illuminating the weathered interior of the once grand stable. At 12 years old, Jake was small for his age, with a mop of unruly brown hair and eyes that carried a wisdom far beyond his years. His worn sneakers scuffed against the hay-strewn floor as he made his way to the back stall, where the most feared horse in Riverdale County waited. Thunder's reputation preceded him, a magnificent black stallion with a coat that gleamed like polished onyx even in the dim light. He had thrown every trainer who dared mount him. His previous owner, the wealthy businessman Victor Reynolds, had declared him untamable before selling him to Jake's uncle for a fraction of his worth. Uncle Frank had bought the horse on impulse, another in a string of failed get-rich-quick schemes that had become increasingly common since Jake's aunt had passed away 2 years ago. "You stay away from that devil, you hear me?" Uncle Frank had warned the night before, nursing his third whiskey of the evening. "He's going to the slaughterhouse next week. No use wasting more money on a lost cause." But Jake couldn't accept that fate for the magnificent animal. He'd seen something in Thunder's eyes that others had missed, not malice, but fear, not defiance, but confusion. And so he'd risen before dawn, determined to make a connection with the horse everyone had given up on. As he approached the stall, Thunder's ears flattened against his head, and he backed away, snorting in warning. Jake stopped, keeping a respectful distance from the gate. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you, I promise." The horse pawed at the ground, eyes wide and wary. Jake had been reading every book on horse training he could get his hands on, borrowing from the library and staying up late with a flashlight under his covers. The traditional methods had failed with Thunder. Perhaps something different was needed. "I'm just going to sit here a while," Jake said, lowering himself to the ground. He pulled an apple from his pocket and took a bite, then set the rest on the ground between them. "Not going to force you to do anything." For an hour, Jake sat in silence, occasionally speaking in low, soothing tones about nothing in particular. School, the weather, the book he was reading. Thunder remained at the back of his stall, but his ears gradually shifted forward, his posture relaxing incrementally. This became Jake's morning ritual. Each day before school, he would rise early and spend an hour with Thunder, just talking and being present. Uncle Frank was too caught up in his own troubles to notice, and the hired help, a gruff old man named Mac who came 3 times a week to feed the animals, merely shook his head at what he considered a foolish endeavor. "That boy's wasting his time," Mac told Ellie Morgan when she stopped by to deliver eggs from her family's neighboring farm. Reynolds had professional trainers who couldn't get near that beast. What chance does a skinny kid have? Ellie, 14 and wise beyond her years, had watched Jake with the horse from a distance. "Maybe that's exactly why Thunder might trust him," she'd replied. "Jake doesn't want anything from him." On the 5th day, Thunder took a tentative step forward and stretched his neck to sniff at the apple Jake had left on the ground. Jake held his breath, keeping his gaze averted, pretending not to notice this monumental gesture of trust. When Thunder finally took the fruit between his teeth, Jake felt tears spring to his eyes, but remained still as a statue. 2 weeks into his secret mission, disaster struck. Jake arrived at the barn to find Uncle Frank already there, arguing with a tall man in an expensive suit. "The deal was for all the horses, Harrison," the man said, his voice cold and precise, "including that black stallion." Uncle Frank, looking more haggard than usual, ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Reynolds told you about Thunder, didn't he? That horse is dangerous, Blackwood. He can't be ridden." The man, Blackwood, smiled thinly. "I'm well aware of the stallion's reputation. My clients in Europe have specialized interests. A challenging horse fetches a premium in certain circles." Jake's heart sank as he realized what was happening. Uncle Frank was selling the farm. All of it, including Thunder. "You can't sell him!" Jake burst out, unable to contain himself. Both men turned, startled by his presence. "He's starting to trust me. He took an apple from me yesterday." Uncle Frank's expression softened momentarily before hardening again. "Jake, this isn't up for discussion. Mr. Blackwood is buying the property and all the livestock. It's done." "But enough," Frank snapped. "Go to school. You're already late." Jake looked from his uncle to Blackwood, whose calculated gaze made him shiver. With a final glance at Thunder's stall, he turned and ran, tears blurring his vision. School passed in a haze of distraction. Jake couldn't focus on fractions or history when all he could think about was Thunder being shipped off to clients with specialized interests, whatever that meant. It couldn't be good. When the final bell rang, Jake bypassed the bus and ran all the way home, his backpack bouncing against his spine. He arrived breathless, relieved to see Blackwood's sleek car gone from the driveway. Uncle Frank was nowhere to be found, probably at the bank finalizing the sale. Jake went straight to the barn. Thunder nickered softly at his approach, the first time the horse had greeted him. The sound nearly broke his heart. "They're going to take you away," Jake said, his voice cracking. "I don't know what to do." As if sensing his distress, Thunder stepped closer to the stall door than he ever had before. Jake slowly raised his hand, palm flat, and held his breath as the horse extended his muzzle. The touch when it came, warm breath and velvet nose against his skin, was electric. "Well, I'll be damned," came a voice from behind him. Jake turned to find Max standing in the doorway, eyes wide with disbelief. "He let me touch him," Jake said, unable to keep the wonder from his voice. Mac approached slowly, shaking his head. "In 30 years, I've never seen anything like it. That horse threw Victor Reynolds and broke his arm in 2 places, nearly killed the trainer from Kentucky." "He's just scared," Jake insisted. "Nobody's taken the time to understand him." Max studied the boy for a long moment. "You really care about this animal, don't you?" Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak without crying. "Your uncle's selling everything to that Blackwood fellow. Some kind of export business." Mac's weathered face creased with concern. "I don't like it. Something doesn't feel right." "Can't we do something?" Jake pleaded. "Thunder's finally starting to trust me." Max sighed heavily. "It's not that simple, kid. Your uncle's up to his eyeballs in debt. This sale is keeping him out of bankruptcy." Jake leaned his forehead against the stall door, defeated. Thunder nudged his shoulder gently, as if offering comfort. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. His mind raced with half-formed plans and desperate ideas. Around midnight, he heard the familiar sound of Uncle Frank's truck pulling into the driveway, followed by unsteady footsteps on the porch. Another late night at the bar, drowning his problems. Jake lay awake until the house fell silent, then slipped out of bed. He dressed quickly in the dark, grabbed his backpack, hastily emptied of school books and refilled with granola bars, a water bottle and a flashlight, and crept downstairs. He scribbled a note for his uncle, apologizing but explaining that he couldn't let Thunder go to Blackwood. The night air was cool as Jake made his way to the barn. The moon, nearly full, cast enough light that he didn't need his flashlight. Thunder was awake, watching as Jake approached with a halter. "I know you're not ready to be ridden," Jake whispered, "but we have to go. I can't let them take you." To his amazement, Thunder allowed him to slip the halter over his head. The horse tensed when Jake opened the stall door but didn't bolt or rear. Jake led him slowly out of the barn, heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would wake his uncle. But where could they go? Jake had friends whose families might shelter them for a night, but no one who could hide a full-grown stallion. Then he remembered. The old Mitchell property. Abandoned for years, it lay 3 miles beyond the outskirts of town, its once proud stables now overgrown and forgotten. Few people ventured there, believing the place to be haunted after the tragic fire that had claimed the Mitchell family. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all he had. Jake led Thunder down the driveway and away from the only home he'd known since his parents' death, unsure of what morning would bring, but certain of one thing. He'd done the right thing. What Jake couldn't know, as he walked beside the massive stallion under the silver moonlight, was that his actions that night would set in motion events that would change not only his life, but the entire community of Riverdale County. Nor could he know that watching from the shadows of a parked car down the road was someone with a very particular interest in the boy and the untamable horse. The journey to the Mitchell property was arduous. 3 miles felt like 30 as Jake led Thunder along back roads and through fields, avoiding the main streets of Riverdale. Every passing car made him flinch, certain it was Uncle Frank or Blackwood coming after them, but no one paid attention to a boy and a horse in the pre-dawn darkness. By the time they reached the abandoned property, the first hints of sunrise were painting the eastern sky. The Mitchell estate loomed before them, a crumbling Victorian mansion with boarded windows and a sagging roof. Behind it, partially hidden by overgrown bushes, stood the old stables. Once among the finest in the county, they had fallen into disrepair after the fire that had claimed the lives of Thomas Mitchell and his wife nearly a decade ago. Jake approached cautiously. The ghost stories about the Mitchell place had been a staple of his childhood. Tales of mysterious lights and the sounds of phantom horses galloping in the night. He'd never believed them, but standing before the decaying structure now, he couldn't help the shivers that ran down his spine. "It's okay," he whispered, more to himself than to Thunder. "We just need a place to hide for a while." The stable doors hung precariously from rusted hinges, but the structure itself seemed sound. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of early morning light that filtered through holes in the roof. Cobwebs draped the corners, and the smell of must and decay filled the air. But it was dry, and more importantly, it was hidden. Jake led Thunder to one of the larger stalls. The wood was weathered but intact, and there was even some old hay scattered about. It would do for now. "I know it's not much," Jake said apologetically, removing the halter. Thunder snorted, shaking his magnificent head before cautiously exploring his new surroundings. Jake watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety. What had seemed like a noble rescue in the dark of night now felt like an impossible situation in the growing light of day. He was 12 years old, with no money, no plan, and a stolen horse. Uncle Frank would be furious when he discovered them missing. And Blackwood? Jake shuddered to think what that cold-eyed man might do. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed him. He'd been up all night, and the adrenaline that had carried him this far was fading fast. Jake settled himself in the corner of the stall, using his backpack as a pillow. Thunder eyed him curiously but made no move to challenge his presence. "Just a quick nap," Jake murmured, his eyelids heavy. "Then we'll figure out our next step." He drifted off to sleep with the comforting sound of Thunder's breathing nearby. Jake awoke with a start to the sound of voices. Sunlight streamed through the stable roof, telling him he'd slept far longer than intended. Thunder stood alert, ears pricked forward. "I'm telling you, I saw someone come in here," a young voice insisted. "A boy and a big black horse." "Probably just squatters," replied a deeper voice. "Dad said to leave them be if we ever found any. Not our problem." Jake held his breath as footsteps approached. Thunder shifted nervously and Jake placed a calming hand on his flank, surprised when the horse didn't pull away. 2 figures appeared at the stall entrance, a girl about Jake's age with fiery red hair and an older boy who shared her freckled complexion. "See? I told you," the girl exclaimed, pointing triumphantly. The older boy's eyes widened. "That's not just any horse. That's Thunder, the one from Harrison's farm." Jake scrambled to his feet. "Please don't tell anyone we're here." "You're Jake Harrison, right?" the girl asked. "I've seen you at school. I'm Lucy Carter, and this is my brother, Will." "What are you doing with that devil horse?" Will demanded. "Everyone knows he's dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Jake protested. "He's just been misunderstood. My uncle was going to sell him to a man named Blackwood, who wanted to ship him overseas. I couldn't let that happen." Lucy approached the stall cautiously. "So you stole him?" "I rescued him," Jake corrected, though his cheeks burned with shame. "He trusts me. Look." As if on cue, Thunder lowered his head and nudged Jake's shoulder gently. Will's jaw dropped. "That's impossible," he breathed. Dad works at the feed store. He says that horse nearly killed 3 men. He was scared, Jake explained. Everyone was trying to break him, to force him to submit. I just talked to him, showed him I wasn't a threat. Lucy's eyes shone with admiration. That's amazing. Will, however, looked skeptical. What's your plan now, Horse Whisperer? Your uncle's got the whole town looking for you. There are posters up and everything. Jake's stomach dropped. Already? I've only been gone 1 night. It's nearly 4 in the afternoon, Lucy pointed out. You've been missing for a whole day. Jake ran a hand through his hair, desperation setting in. I don't know what to do. I can't go back. They'll take Thunder away. Will and Lucy exchanged glances. We might be able to help, Lucy said hesitantly. Our dad's the caretaker for the Mitchell property. That's why we're here. We check on the place every few days. Your dad is the caretaker? Jake repeated, confused. But this place is abandoned. Not exactly, Will explained. Old Mrs. Mitchell, Thomas's mother, still owns it. She lives in a nursing home in the city now, but she pays our dad to keep an eye on the property. Says she's going to restore it someday, though that seems less likely every year. Hope flared in Jake's chest. Would your dad let us stay here, just until I figure something out? Will shook his head. No way. He'd turn you in immediately. But... He glanced at his sister, who nodded encouragingly. We might be able to keep your secret for a while. Bring you food and water for the horse. You do that for me? Jake asked, hardly daring to believe it. Not for you, Lucy corrected with a grin. For Thunder. I've always loved horses, and what you're doing for him is, well, it's brave. Relief washed over Jake like a wave. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. Just promise you won't get us in trouble, Will said firmly. And at some point you'll have to face your uncle. Jake nodded solemnly. I know. I just need time to prove that Thunder can be gentle. If people could see him the way I do. We have to go now, Lucy said, glancing at her watch. Dad will wonder where we are, but we'll come back tomorrow with supplies. After the Carter siblings left, Jake sat in contemplative silence, Thunder grazing peacefully nearby. His situation was still precarious, but at least he wasn't completely alone anymore. The next few days fell into a routine. Will and Lucy would visit in the afternoon, bringing food for Jake and grain for Thunder. They smuggled old blankets from their house for Jake to sleep on and shared news from town. Uncle Frank was indeed searching everywhere, and Blackwood had doubled his offer for Thunder's return, claiming the horse was a rare bloodline he'd promised to a client. Meanwhile, Jake continued his patient work with Thunder. Each day, the horse grew more comfortable with his presence. By the end of the week, Jake could brush him from head to tail, and Thunder would follow him around the old paddock without a lead. It's incredible, Lucy marveled as she watched them one afternoon. No one will believe it unless they see it themselves. That's it, Jake exclaimed, struck by sudden inspiration. People need to see it. Not just you and Will, but everyone, including my uncle and Blackwood. What are you thinking? Will asked warily. The Founders' Day festival is next weekend, right? With the horse parade and everything. Lucy's eyes widened. You can't be serious. You want to ride Thunder in the parade? Maybe not ride him yet, Jake admitted. But lead him through town. Show everyone he's not the monster they think he is. That's crazy, Will said flatly. You're a fugitive, remember? The moment you show your face in town, you'll be caught. Not if I have a plan, Jake countered, his mind racing. And not if I have help. The siblings exchanged concerned glances, but there was no denying the determination in Jake's eyes. Something had changed in the boy during his time at the Mitchell property. The quiet, reserved kid who had always faded into the background at school had found his voice and his purpose. All right, Will sighed. Let's hear this plan of yours. As Jake outlined his ideas, Thunder watched from the paddock, as if understanding that his fate hung in the balance. The afternoon sun caught his coat, transforming the black stallion into a creature of living obsidian. In just a week, his eyes had lost their wild fear, replaced by something new: trust. What none of them realized was that they were being observed. From the cover of trees at the edge of the property, a figure watched through binoculars, noting the remarkable interaction between boy and horse. After a few minutes, the observer retreated silently to a car parked on the old service road, pulled out a phone, and made a call. "I found them," the voice said quietly. "You're not going to believe what I'm seeing." The following days were a flurry of preparation and anxiety. Jake divided his time between working with Thunder and refining his plan for the Founders' Day festival. The bond between boy and horse grew stronger with each passing hour, evolving into something that even Jake hadn't thought possible. Thunder now nickered in greeting whenever Jake approached, and would follow him around the paddock like an oversized puppy, no halter or lead rope required. "It's like he understands everything you say," Lucy remarked one afternoon, watching from the fence as Jake talked softly to the stallion while grooming him. Jake smiled, running the brush along Thunder's gleaming flank. "Sometimes I think he does. He's smarter than people give him credit for." Will arrived shortly after, looking troubled. He carried the usual supplies, sandwiches, apples, and a newspaper, but his expression was grave as he approached the paddock. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, immediately sensing his friend's unease. Will handed him the newspaper wordlessly. The headline made Jake's blood run cold. "Search for missing boy and valuable horse intensifies." Below it was a picture of Jake from the previous school year, alongside one of Thunder taken at Uncle Frank's farm. "It's worse than that," Will said grimly. "Blackwood has hired private investigators. They're offering a $5,000 reward for information." Lucy gasped. "That's more than our dad makes in 3 months. Jake sank down onto a weathered bench, the newspaper trembling in his hands. "People will be looking everywhere with that kind of money on the line. And that's not all," Will continued. "They're saying now that you might be in danger, that the horse is violent and could hurt you. They're playing it like they're concerned for your safety." "That's ridiculous," Jake exclaimed. "Look at him." He gestured to Thunder, who was calmly grazing nearby, the picture of serenity. "Does he look dangerous to you?" "We know the truth," Lucy assured him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "But the rest of the town believes what they read in the papers." Will crossed his arms, his freckled face serious. "I think we need to scrap the Founders' Day plan. It's too risky now." Jake stood up, determination replacing his momentary despair. "No, we need to stick to the plan now more than ever. It's the only way to show everyone the truth." "Jake, be reasonable," Will pleaded. "With that reward money, someone is bound to recognize you the minute you set foot in town." "Then I won't be recognized," Jake said firmly. "I'll wear a disguise." Lucy, who had been quiet, suddenly perked up. "I have an idea. My Aunt Meredith does costume design for the community theater. She has wigs, makeup, everything we'd need." Will looked at his sister incredulously. "You want to get Aunt Meredith involved in this too? Are you trying to get our whole family in trouble?" "We wouldn't tell her what it's for," Lucy explained. "I'll just say it's for a school project or something." Jake paced back and forth, his mind racing. "It could work. I could wear a disguise, bring Thunder into town during the parade when everyone's distracted, and then show them all what he can really do." "And what happens after that?" Will challenged. "Even if you prove Thunder isn't dangerous, you still took him without permission. That's theft, Jake." Jake stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I know. But if I can prove that he's gentle, that he's been misunderstood all this time, maybe Uncle Frank will let me keep working with him. Maybe we can convince Blackwood that he's not the wild stallion he thinks he is." "That's a lot of maybes," Will said doubtfully. Lucy, ever the optimist, brightened. "But it's worth trying, isn't it? What's the alternative? Hiding out here forever?" Will sighed, knowing when he was outnumbered. "Fine. But we need a better plan than just showing up in the middle of the parade. And you'll need more help than just us." "What about Ellie Morgan?" Lucy suggested. "She works at the stables outside town. She knows horses better than anyone." Jake considered this. Ellie had always been kind to him, and she had a reputation as something of a horse whisperer herself. "Do you think she'd help us?" Only one way to find out, Will said, resigned to the fact that this scheme was moving forward with or without his full support. The next day, Lucy brought Ellie to the Mitchell property. The older girl's eyes widened in disbelief when she saw Jake leading Thunder around the paddock without any restraints, the massive stallion responding to subtle gestures and quiet words. "I don't believe it," Ellie breathed, her hands gripping the fence. "That's the same horse that nearly killed Victor Reynolds?" Jake nodded, guiding Thunder to the fence with just a gentle touch on his neck. He was scared and confused before. No one took the time to understand him. Ellie's expert gaze assessed the stallion. "He's magnificent, and his conformation is exceptional. No wonder Blackwood wants him so badly." "Will you help us?" Lucy asked eagerly. "Jake wants to bring Thunder to the Founders' Day festival to show everyone he's not dangerous." Ellie frowned, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "That's risky, very risky." "I know," Jake admitted, "but I'm out of options. If there was another way—" "Actually," Ellie said slowly, "there might be." All eyes turned to her expectantly. "Mrs. Bennett, my boss at Willow Creek Stables, is one of the judges for the festival's horse showcase. If I tell her about Thunder, about what you've accomplished with him, she'd still want to know where I've been keeping him," Jake pointed out, "and why I took him in the first place." Ellie bit her lip, thinking, what if we don't mention it's Thunder at first? What if we present him as a rescue case I've been working with privately? Once people see how gentle he is, how well trained, then we can reveal the truth. Hope flickered in Jake's chest. "Do you think Mrs. Bennett would agree to that?" "She might," Ellie said cautiously, "especially if I can show her evidence of his transformation first. She's always believed that there's no such thing as a bad horse, just bad training." For the first time in days, Jake felt a genuine smile spread across his face. This could actually work. The plan evolved over the next few days. Ellie would approach Mrs. Bennett about a special demonstration at the festival, a rescued horse that had overcome a troubled past. Meanwhile, Lucy would secure disguise materials from her Aunt Meredith, and Will would scout the festival grounds to identify the best entry point and performance area. Jake intensified his work with Thunder, teaching him to bow, to follow complex directional commands, and even to perform a gentle Spanish walk, all without bridle or saddle. The stallion's intelligence and willingness to please astonished everyone, even Ellie with her years of equine experience. "It's like he was born to perform," she remarked, watching Thunder execute a perfect turn on the haunches in response to Jake's subtle hand signal. "I've never seen a horse pick things up so quickly." Jake beamed with pride. He just needed someone to believe in him. The night before the festival, the group gathered at the Mitchell property for one final planning session. The old stable, which had seemed so foreboding when Jake first arrived, now felt almost like home. He'd cleaned out one of the rooms adjacent to the stalls, creating a cozy space with the blankets and supplies his friends had brought. "Okay, let's go over it one more time," Will said, spreading a hand-drawn map of the festival grounds on an upturned crate. "Ellie has convinced Mrs. Bennett to allow a special demonstration at 2 p.m. between the parade and the barrel racing competition. Jake, disguised as Ellie's assistant, will bring Thunder in through the north entrance, where I'll be waiting to guide you to the demonstration area." Lucy held up a backpack. "I've got the disguise, a wig, glasses, and some stage makeup that will make you look completely different. I'll help you put it on tomorrow morning. And I've been working with Mrs. Bennett on the announcement," Ellie added. "She's intrigued by the story of a rescued stallion with a troubled past, but doesn't know the full truth yet. We'll have to tell her right before the demonstration, or she might feel obligated to report us." Jake nodded, his stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and dread. "And what about Uncle Frank? Or Blackwood?" A heavy silence fell over the group. It was the question they'd all been avoiding. "Your uncle will definitely be there," Will said finally. "The whole town attends Founders' Day. And Blackwood's men have been patrolling the area for days," Ellie confirmed. "They'll be watching for any sign of Thunder." Jake stroked the stallion's nose, drawing comfort from his steady presence. Then we'll just have to make sure our demonstration is so incredible that even they can't deny what Thunder has become." As his friends departed, each promising to meet at the designated times the next day, Jake remained in the stable with Thunder. The enormity of what they were attempting settled over him like a heavy blanket. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. "It's just you and me now, boy," he whispered, leaning his forehead against Thunder's. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these weeks with you have been the best of my life." Thunder nickered softly in response, his warm breath ghosting over Jake's face. In the stallion's dark eyes, Jake saw not fear or aggression, but a reflection of his own determination. They would face tomorrow together, the unwanted boy and the untamable horse, ready to show the world what was possible when you looked beyond appearances and reputations to the heart that beat beneath. What Jake couldn't know was that Blackwood had already received a tip about unusual activity at the Mitchell property, and his men were planning a pre-dawn visit to investigate. The pre-dawn air was chilly as two black SUVs rolled silently down the overgrown access road to the Mitchell property. Inside the lead vehicle, Blackwood's chief investigator, a former police detective named Vance, checked his watch. 5:30 a.m. The Founders' Day festival wouldn't begin until 10, giving them plenty of time to search the abandoned estate. "Remember," Vance instructed the four men with him, "we're looking for a boy and a black stallion. The kid's not dangerous, but the horse is unpredictable. Approach with caution." In the stable, Jake awoke with a start. Something had disturbed his sleep, a sound that didn't belong. He sat up on his makeshift bed, heart hammering in his chest as he strained to listen. Thunder, usually calm in the early hours, was shifting restlessly in his stall, ears pricked forward. "What is it, boy?" Jake whispered, rising to his feet. Then he heard it, the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. His blood ran cold. No one should be driving to the Mitchell property at this hour, especially not on the day of the festival. Jake peered through a crack in the wooden wall, his worst fears confirmed as he spotted the black SUVs crawling toward the stable. "Blackwood!" he breathed, panic rising in his throat. Jake's mind raced. There was no time to wait for his friends. They wouldn't arrive for hours. He had to get Thunder out now before Blackwood's men could search the stables. But where could they go? The festival grounds were miles away, and hiding in the surrounding woods would only delay the inevitable. Thunder sensed his anxiety, nickering softly. Jake took a deep breath, forcing himself to think clearly. There was a back exit from the stables, leading to an old riding trail that wound through the dense forest behind the Mitchell property. If they could reach it unseen, they might have a chance. Working with swift, silent movements, Jake gathered his few possessions into his backpack. He approached Thunder, who was now fully alert, dark eyes fixed on the stable door. "We have to go," Jake whispered, slipping a halter over the stallion's head. For once, he wished he had a proper saddle, but there had been no need for one during their training sessions. They would have to make do. Outside, car doors slammed as Blackwood's men disembarked. Jake heard Vance giving instructions, his voice carrying in the still morning air. "Jenkins, Roberts, take the main house. Peterson and I will check the stables." Time was running out. Jake led Thunder to the rear of the stable where a weathered door hung slightly ajar. He eased it open, wincing at the creak of rusted hinges. The forest beyond was still shadowed in pre-dawn darkness, the trees offering cover if they could reach them unseen. Just as they were about to slip out, Thunder's hoof struck an empty metal bucket, sending it clattering across the concrete floor. The noise seemed deafening in the quiet morning. "What was that?" Vance's voice called out. "Someone's in there." Footsteps pounded toward the stable entrance. Jake had no choice. He vaulted onto Thunder's bare back, a maneuver they'd practiced only a handful of times. The stallion tensed but remained steady. "Let's go, boy," Jake urged, leaning forward to whisper in Thunder's ear. "Run!" As Vance and Peterson burst through the stable's main door, Thunder exploded into motion, surging through the back exit and into the forest. Jake clung to the stallion's mane, his heart racing as fast as Thunder's hooves. Behind them, shouts of alarm faded as they plunged deeper into the woods. The old riding trail was barely visible, overgrown after years of disuse. But Thunder seemed to sense where to go, weaving between trees with surprising agility. Jake fought to keep his balance on the stallion's broad back, the world a blur of shadow and emerging sunlight filtering through the leaves. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, Jake guided Thunder to a stop in a small clearing. Both were breathing hard, the stallion's sides heaving beneath Jake's legs. He slid off, checking to ensure they weren't being followed. "Good boy," Jake praised, stroking Thunder's neck. "You're amazing." The problem now was figuring out what to do next. The festival wouldn't start for hours, and his friends would have no idea where to find him. Plus, without the disguise Lucy was supposed to bring, he couldn't risk showing up in town. As the sun began to rise, painting the forest in golden light, Jake made a decision. They would follow the trail to its end, wherever that might be, and hope it led somewhere safe. He couldn't return to the Mitchell property now that Blackwood's men had found it. With renewed determination, Jake remounted Thunder, and they continued along the trail at a walk. The stallion moved with confidence, as if he'd traveled this path before, though Jake knew that was impossible. The trail gradually widened, signs of maintenance appearing, trimmed branches, cleared undergrowth. After about an hour, they emerged from the forest to find themselves on the outskirts of a property Jake didn't recognize. A well-kept fence line stretched in both directions, and beyond it lay rolling pastures where several horses grazed peacefully. "Where are we?" Jake murmured, squinting at a sign partially obscured by morning mist. As they drew closer, the words became clear. "Willow Creek Stables." Jake gasped in disbelief. Somehow, the old trail had led them directly to Ellie's workplace. It was almost too fortunate to be coincidence. Before he could decide whether to approach or retreat back into the forest, a figure on horseback appeared on the other side of the fence. Ellie herself, out for an early morning ride. She reined her mount to a stop, jaw dropping as she recognized them. "Jake? Thunder?" she called, disbelief evident in her voice. "What on earth are you doing here?" "Blackwood's men found us at the Mitchell place," Jake explained breathlessly, as Ellie dismounted and opened a nearby gate to let them in. "We barely got away. The old trail through the forest led us here." Ellie's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "The Mitchell-Morgan Trail. It hasn't been used in years, but it connects the two properties. The Mitchells and my boss's family were close friends back in the day." "It's like Thunder knew where to go," Jake said, patting the stallion's neck. Ellie smiled. "Horses have better instincts than we give them credit for. Come on, let's get you two inside before anyone sees you." She led them to a small private barn set apart from the main stables. "This is where we keep new arrivals for quarantine," she explained. "No one will bother you here, at least for a little while." Once Thunder was settled in a clean stall with fresh water and hay, Ellie turned to Jake. "I need to tell Mrs. Bennett what's happening. She's the only one who can help us now." Fear flashed across Jake's face. "What if she turns us in? The reward money—" "Mrs. Bennett cares more about horses than money," Ellie assured him. "And when she sees what you've accomplished with Thunder, she'll understand why you did what you did." Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but what about Will and Lucy? They'll be waiting for us at the Mitchell place." "I'll call them," Ellie promised. "We'll figure this out together." While Ellie went to find her boss, Jake sat beside Thunder's stall, his mind whirling with everything that had happened. In just a few short weeks, his life had transformed completely. He'd gone from being the quiet nephew of a struggling farmer to a fugitive with a supposedly dangerous horse. And now, on the day they were meant to prove Thunder's transformation to the world, everything had fallen apart. But as Thunder nudged his shoulder affectionately, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. They'd come too far to give up now. Somehow they would still make it to the festival. They had to. Mrs. Bennett arrived within the hour, a tall, imposing woman with silver-streaked black hair and the weathered complexion of someone who'd spent decades outdoors. Her sharp eyes took in Jake and Thunder, assessing them both with a professional gaze that missed nothing. "So," she said finally, "you're the boy who tamed the untamable stallion." Jake stood, suddenly aware of his rumpled clothes and disheveled appearance. "Yes, ma'am. But I didn't tame him. I just showed him he could trust me." A hint of a smile touched Mrs. Bennett's lips. "That's the essence of true horsemanship, young man. Understanding, not dominance." She approached Thunder's stall slowly, respecting the stallion's space. Thunder regarded her calmly, showing none of the aggression that had made him infamous. "May I?" she asked Jake, gesturing toward the horse. Jake nodded, and Mrs. Bennett extended her hand. Thunder sniffed it, then allowed her to stroke his nose. "Remarkable," she murmured. "Victor Reynolds swore this horse was a lost cause, said he'd never seen such wild aggression in a domestic breed. He was just scared," Jake explained. "People tried to break him instead of earning his trust." Mrs. Bennett studied Jake with newfound respect. "Ellie tells me you plan to demonstrate his transformation at the festival today." "Yes, but now Blackwood's men are searching for us, and I don't have the disguise my friend was bringing." Mrs. Bennett's expression hardened at the mention of Blackwood. "That man has a reputation in the horse community, and not a good one. There are rumors about where his exported horses end up." She seemed to come to a decision, straightening her shoulders. "The festival begins in 3 hours. I can provide you with clothes that will serve as a disguise, and we can transport Thunder in my private trailer. No one will think to look for him there." Hope surged in Jake's chest. "You'd do that for us?" "I'm doing it for the horse," Mrs. Bennett corrected, though her eyes were kind. "And for the future of proper horsemanship in this county. What you've achieved with this stallion deserves to be seen." As Mrs. Bennett left to make arrangements, Jake leaned against Thunder's stall, relief washing over him. They still had a chance. What none of them realized was that the festival would bring one more unexpected participant, someone whose presence would change everything. The Founders' Day Festival transformed Riverdale's sleepy town square into a vibrant celebration of local heritage. Red, white, and blue bunting draped from lampposts, while the scent of cotton candy and barbecue filled the air. Families strolled between booths selling crafts and baked goods. Children darted about with painted faces, and a small stage hosted local musicians playing folksy tunes that set toes tapping. At the edge of town, the fairgrounds had been prepared for the equestrian events, with a show ring surrounded by bleachers already filling with spectators. Horses of all sizes and colors were being groomed in the temporary stabling area, their owners fussing over braided manes and polished tack. In a quiet corner of the preparation area, Mrs. Bennett's elegant horse trailer stood apart from the others. Inside, Jake, now dressed in jeans boots and a western shirt borrowed from Mrs. Bennett's son, with a cowboy hat pulled low over his brow, was giving Thunder a final grooming. The stallion's coat gleamed like polished obsidian under Jake's brush strokes. "You look like a different person," Ellie remarked, slipping into the trailer. "I almost didn't recognize you myself." Jake adjusted his hat nervously. "Do you think it'll be enough? Uncle Frank has known me my whole life." "Keep your head down and let me do the talking," Ellie advised. "Mrs. Bennett has arranged everything. You'll only need to enter the ring when your name, well, your fake name, is called." Will and Lucy had arrived 30 minutes earlier, relieved to find Jake and Thunder safe after the close call at the Mitchell property. They reported that Blackwood's men were indeed at the festival, circulating through the crowd with pictures of Jake and Thunder. "They're offering double the reward now," Will had whispered. $10,000 for information leading to your whereabouts." The news had sent fresh waves of anxiety through Jake, but there was no turning back now. Too many people had risked too much to help him reach this point. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the trailer's small window, they could see a sleek black car pulling up to the fairgrounds. The door opened, and out stepped Victor Reynolds, Thunder's original owner. The wealthy businessman moved with the confident stride of someone used to commanding attention, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the casual attire of most festival goers. "What's he doing here?" Jake hissed. Ellie frowned. I don't know. He hasn't attended the Founders Day festival in years, not since… She trailed off, but Jake knew what she meant. Not since Thunder had thrown Reynolds and broken his arm, cementing the stallion's reputation as dangerous and unmanageable. This complicates things, Mrs. Bennett said, joining them in the trailer. Reynolds will recognize Thunder immediately. Should we cancel? Lucy asked, her freckled face pinched with worry. Mrs. Bennett considered this, then shook her head firmly. No. We proceed as planned. In fact, Reynolds's presence might work to our advantage. What better witness to Thunder's transformation than the man who declared him untamable? Jake wasn't so sure, but he trusted Mrs. Bennett's judgment. She had revised their plan slightly. Instead of a simple demonstration, Jake and Thunder would participate in the Liberty class, a competition where horses performed without bridles or leads, responding solely to their handler's voice and body language. It was the most challenging event of the day, and one that Thunder, with his weeks of specialized training, was uniquely prepared for. The class starts in 45 minutes, Mrs. Bennett informed them. I've registered you as Jack Wilson, my nephew visiting from out of state. Just remember the signals we practiced, and let Thunder do the rest. As Mrs. Bennett left to attend to her duties as judge, Jake turned back to Thunder, their eyes meeting in silent communication. This is it, boy, he murmured, pressing his forehead to the stallion's. Our chance to show everyone who you really are. Meanwhile, across the fairgrounds, Uncle Frank stood beside the food vendors, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The past weeks had aged him visibly, new lines etched around his eyes, his shoulders stooped with worry. Despite their differences, Jake was his nephew, his only family. The thought that the boy might be hurt or worse because of a horse Frank had impulsively purchased weighed heavily on his conscience. Any news? Asked Mac, approaching with a sympathetic expression. Frank shook his head. Nothing. It's like they vanished into thin air. The boy knows what he's doing, Mac said, surprising Frank. I saw him with that horse before they disappeared. There was something special there. Frank's retort was cut short by the sight of Blackwood striding purposefully toward them, flanked by two of his men. Harrison, Blackwood greeted coldly. My team found evidence of your nephew at the old Mitchell property. He was there recently, but someone tipped him off before we could apprehend him. Frank felt a surge of relief that Jake hadn't been caught, followed immediately by concern for his continued safety. And you're telling me this why, Blackwood? Because I believe he'll be here today, Blackwood replied, his eyes scanning the crowd. The festival would provide the perfect opportunity for him to slip back into town unnoticed. If my nephew comes home, that's between him and me, Frank said firmly. Our deal is off. I want no part in your export business anymore. Blackwood's face hardened. Our contract says otherwise, Harrison. You've been paid a deposit for that stallion, and I intend to collect. Sue me, Frank challenged, newfound courage in his voice. But you're not getting that horse if Jake brings him back. As Blackwood stalked away, barely containing his fury, Frank felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Whatever happened next, he would stand by his nephew. It had taken Jake's act of defiance to make Frank realize what truly mattered. What Frank couldn't know was that Victor Reynolds had overheard their entire exchange from his position near the lemonade stand. Reynolds' interest was piqued, not just by the mention of Thunder, the stallion that had humiliated him, but by Blackwood's reference to his export business. He had suspected for some time that Blackwood's operation wasn't entirely legitimate, but proof had been elusive. Reynolds gestured to his assistant, a sharp-eyed woman who had been documenting the festival for his social media accounts. Find out more about this Liberty class. I want to see who's competing. Back at the trailer, final preparations were underway. Mrs. Bennett had brought a program listing all the day's events, and Jake studied it nervously. There were 5 other competitors in the Liberty class, all experienced trainers with well-established reputations. Against such competition, would Thunder's transformation be impressive enough? Stop doubting yourself, Ellie said, reading his expression. What you've accomplished with Thunder is nothing short of miraculous. Trust in that. A loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing that the Liberty class would begin in 15 minutes. Competitors were instructed to bring their horses to the warm-up ring. "That's your cue," Will said, patting Jake's shoulder. "We'll be in the stands cheering you on." "Remember," Ellie added, "if anything goes wrong, if you're recognized or if Thunder gets spooked, just signal me, and we'll create a distraction so you can get away." Jake nodded, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. He led Thunder from the trailer. The stallion's ears perked with interest at the festive sounds around them. Despite the chaos of the fairgrounds, Thunder remained calm, responding to Jake's quiet reassurances with gentle nickers. As they made their way to the warm-up ring, Jake kept his head down, the borrowed hat shadowing his face. They passed within yards of Uncle Frank, who was now making his way toward the bleachers, but the older man didn't give them a second glance. The warm-up ring was busy with the other competitors, all executing impressive maneuvers with their horses. Jake found a quiet corner and began his own preparation, running through the routine they had practiced countless times at the Mitchell property. Thunder responded flawlessly, pivoting, bowing, and trotting in tight circles around Jake, all without a single touch. Their performance didn't go unnoticed. Several onlookers paused to watch, murmuring in admiration. Among them was Victor Reynolds, who had positioned himself at the rail for a better view of the competitors. His eyes narrowed as he observed the black stallion. There was something familiar about the horse's conformation, the proud arch of his neck, the powerful build. "Impossible," Reynolds muttered, stepping closer for a better look. Jake felt the man's scrutiny and turned away, heart hammering in his chest. Had Reynolds recognized Thunder already? Would their plan be foiled before it even began? A whistle signaled the competitors to line up for the class. Jake guided Thunder toward the entrance of the main show ring, joining the other trainers and their horses. The stands were packed now, the entire town seemingly gathered to watch the most prestigious event of the festival. As Jake waited for his turn, he scanned the crowd, spotting Will and Lucy in the third row, giving him encouraging thumbs up. Further along, he was shocked to see Uncle Frank looking more haggard than Jake remembered. Guilt tugged at his heart. He hadn't considered how his disappearance might have affected his uncle. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Liberty class of the Riverdale Founders Day Festival. Today, you'll witness the highest form of partnership between human and horse. Communication without physical contact, trust without restraint." One by one, the competitors entered the ring, each demonstrating impressive control over their horses. The crowd applauded politely for each performance, but none elicited gasps of genuine awe. Then came the moment Jake had been both dreading and anticipating. Next up, we have a special guest competitor, Jack Wilson with his stallion Shadow. Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped into the ring, Thunder following close behind. The hushed whispers began immediately. Despite the disguise, despite the fake name, there was no hiding Thunder's distinctive appearance. Victor Reynolds leaned forward in his seat, recognition dawning on his face. Near the judges' table, Blackwood had appeared, his cold eyes fixed on the magnificent black stallion. For a heart-stopping moment, Jake considered fleeing. But then he caught Mrs. Bennett's encouraging nod from the judges' table, saw the belief in her eyes. He remembered all the people who had risked so much to help him reach this moment. Will, Lucy, Ellie, Mrs. Bennett. They believed in him, in Thunder. Now it was time to show everyone else what was possible when you looked beyond appearances and reputations to the heart beneath. Jake raised his hand, and the music he had selected began to play, a haunting melody that filled the arena. With a deep breath, he turned to Thunder and whispered, "Show them who you really are, boy." And with that, the most remarkable demonstration of trust between human and horse that Riverdale had ever witnessed began to unfold. A hush fell over the crowd as Jake stood alone in the center of the ring, Thunder several paces away. For a moment, they were perfectly still, like figures in a painting, a small boy and a magnificent black stallion, connected by nothing but invisible threads of trust. Then, Jake raised his hand just a few inches, and Thunder began to move. The stallion circled him at a distance, each hoof placement deliberate and graceful, his neck arched proudly. Jake turned slowly, maintaining eye contact, And with another subtle gesture, Thunder changed direction, never breaking stride. The audience watched in silent amazement. Liberty work was always impressive, but there was something about this performance that transcended the usual technical display. The communication between boy and horse seemed almost telepathic, a dance of two beings who understood each other completely. Jake's heart pounded, but his hands remained steady. He gave another signal, barely perceptible to the onlookers, and Thunder transitioned into a Spanish walk, lifting each front leg high with exaggerated precision. The stallion's movements were fluid, powerful, yet controlled, like living sculpture in motion. In the stands, Uncle Frank leaned forward, squinting at the boy in the ring. There was something familiar about him, something in the way he moved, in his posture as he worked with the horse. And that stallion, so similar to Thunder that it was uncanny. Could it be? "That's him," hissed Blackwood, who had materialized beside Frank. "That's your nephew and my horse." Frank shook his head in disbelief. "It can't be." Thunder was unmanageable. "This horse is magnificent," Blackwood finished, his voice tight with barely contained rage. "Which makes him even more valuable to my clients. I'm calling my men." As he reached for his phone, Frank grabbed his arm. "Wait, let the boy finish." Blackwood's eyes narrowed, but he paused, watching as the performance continued. In the ring, Jake and Thunder had moved to the next sequence. With a soft click of his tongue, Jake signaled for Thunder to rear. The stallion rose majestically on his hind legs, forelegs pawing at the air, silhouetted against the late morning sun. The crowd gasped collectively. "That's Thunder," Victor Reynolds muttered, recognition cementing into certainty. "But it's impossible. That horse nearly killed me." Yet the evidence was before his eyes. The same stallion that had thrown him violently, that had resisted every professional trainer money could buy, was now performing complex maneuvers with nothing but the subtlest cues from a boy. Jake guided Thunder through the rest of their routine, lateral movements, collected trots, and finally, the most challenging element. Jake knelt on one knee, extending his arms wide, and Thunder approached to lay his head gently over the boy's shoulder in a gesture of absolute trust. The stallion's eyes were half closed, his breathing calm and steady against Jake's neck. For Jake, the world outside the ring had ceased to exist. There was only Thunder, the rhythm of their connection, the joy of working together in perfect harmony. This was what he had dreamed of showing everyone. Not just that Thunder could be controlled, but that he could be a willing, enthusiastic partner when treated with patience and respect. As the music faded, Jake and Thunder stood facing the crowd, the boy's hand resting lightly on the stallion's neck. For a heartbeat, there was complete silence. Then the applause began, tentative at first, then building to a thunderous ovation. People rose to their feet, cheering and whistling. The spell broken, Jake suddenly remembered where they were and what was at stake. His eyes darted to the edges of the ring, where he spotted Blackwood and his men beginning to close in. In the stands, Uncle Frank was pushing his way toward the exit, clearly intending to intercept them. Jake's heart sank. They had accomplished what they came to do. They had shown everyone the truth about Thunder. But now, escape seemed impossible. He looked to Ellie in panic, but she was already moving, slipping into the ring with a lead rope. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "That was an extraordinary demonstration by Jack Wilson and Shadow. Let's hear another round of applause while our judges confer." Mrs. Bennett had risen from the judges' table, her expression inscrutable as she consulted with the other officials. The delay gave Ellie time to reach Jake and Thunder. "Blackwood's men are coming," she whispered urgently. "We need to get you out of here now." Jake nodded, his hand trembling slightly as he stroked Thunder's neck. "But how? They're everywhere." Before Ellie could respond, a commanding voice cut through the noise of the crowd. "Stop right there." Victor Reynolds strode into the ring, his expensive suit incongruous against the dirt floor. Security personnel moved to intercept him, but he waved them off with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "That's my horse," Reynolds declared, pointing at Thunder. "And that boy stole him." The crowd murmured in confusion. Ellie stepped protectively in front of Jake, but he gently moved her aside. He had come too far to hide now. With deliberate movements, Jake removed his hat, revealing his face to the entire festival. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers as recognition dawned. "My name is Jake Harrison," he announced, his voice carrying surprisingly well across the now silent arena. "And yes, this is Thunder, the horse everyone said couldn't be tamed." Uncle Frank had reached the ring entrance, his face a complex mixture of emotions, relief, confusion, anger, and something else Jake couldn't quite identify. Pride, perhaps? "Jacob," Frank began, but Jake held up his hand. "Please, Uncle Frank, let me finish." To Jake's surprise, his uncle fell silent, nodding for him to continue. "3 weeks ago, I heard that Thunder was going to be sold to Mr. Blackwood, who intended to ship him overseas." Jake gestured toward Blackwood, who stood rigid with fury at being called out publicly. "I'd been working with Thunder in secret, and I knew he wasn't the monster everyone thought he was. He was just scared and confused." Jake turned to Victor Reynolds. "Sir, when Thunder threw you, it wasn't because he was mean or dangerous. It was because he didn't trust you, because no one had taken the time to earn his trust." Reynolds' face flushed with anger, but something in Jake's earnest delivery gave him pause. "So I took him," Jake continued. "I hid him at the old Mitchell place, and I kept working with him, not forcing him to submit, but showing him he could trust me. And look at him now." As if on cue, Thunder stepped forward and lowered his head to nuzzle Jake's shoulder affectionately. The gesture, so gentle from a horse once considered lethal, was more eloquent than any words Jake could have spoken. Mrs. Bennet chose that moment to approach, her dignified presence commanding attention. "As head judge, I can confirm that what we've witnessed today is exceptional horsemanship of the highest order. This young man has accomplished what multiple professional trainers could not." She turned to address Victor Reynolds directly. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand your frustration, but I think there's something more important at stake here than property rights." "And what would that be?" Reynolds asked stiffly. "The welfare of a remarkable animal," Mrs. Bennet replied, "and the recognition of a remarkable talent." The crowd had fallen completely silent, hanging on every word of this unexpected drama. Even the festival rides had temporarily ceased operation, their operators as captivated as everyone else. "I want my horse back," Reynolds stated flatly. "So you can sell him to Blackwood?" Jake challenged, a courage he didn't know he possessed rising within him. "So he can be shipped off to clients with specialized interests?" The implication hung in the air. Blackwood stepped forward, his composure cracking. "Watch your accusations, boy. You're already facing charges for theft." "Actually," came a new voice, "Mr. Blackwood might be facing some charges of his own." All heads turned to see Sheriff Miller entering the ring, accompanied by 2 deputies. The sheriff, a stocky woman with salt and pepper hair and shrewd eyes, nodded respectfully to Mrs. Bennet before addressing the gathering. "We've been investigating Mr. Blackwood's export operation for some time," she explained. "Based on information received recently, we have reason to believe he's been involved in illegal horse trafficking." Blackwood's face drained of color. "This is absurd. I run a legitimate business." "Then you won't mind us examining your shipping records," the sheriff countered smoothly. "In the meantime, I think this dispute over the horse should be handled through proper legal channels, not in the middle of our Founders' Day festival." The tension in the air was palpable as Sheriff Miller turned to Jake. "Young man, taking someone else's property, even with the best intentions, is still against the law. We'll need to sort this out at the station." Jake's heart sank. After everything, was he going to end up in juvenile detention? Would Thunder be returned to Reynolds, only to be sold to another buyer with questionable intentions? "Wait." Uncle Frank stepped into the ring, looking more resolute than Jake had seen him in years. "Sheriff, there's something you should know. I'm the legal owner of that horse, not Reynolds. He sold Thunder to me outright 3 months ago." Reynolds started to protest, but Frank cut him off. "I have the bill of sale at home. You gave up all rights to him when you decided he was worthless. And are you pressing charges against your nephew for taking your horse?" Sheriff Miller asked. Frank looked at Jake, then at Thunder, witnessing the bond between them. Something softened in his weathered face. No charges. The boy did what he thought was right, and judging by what we all just saw, he was right. Relief washed over Jake like a wave. Uncle Frank wasn't angry, he understood. As for my deal with Blackwood, Frank continued, I'm terminating it, effective immediately. If he has a problem with that, we can discuss it with our respective lawyers. Sheriff Miller nodded, satisfied for the moment. All right then, Mr. Blackwood, I'll need you to come with me to answer some questions. Mr. Reynolds, if you have a claim on the horse, you're welcome to file it formally. As the sheriff led Blackwood away, the tension in the arena gradually dissipated. The announcer, sensing the moment had passed, cleared his throat. Well, folks, that was certainly unexpected. Let's take a short break before our next event. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excited chatter about what they'd witnessed, both the remarkable performance and the dramatic confrontation that followed. Jake found himself standing in the middle of the ring with Thunder, Uncle Frank, Ellie, and Mrs. Bennett, an island of calm in the receding chaos. Will and Lucy pushed their way through to join them, faces alight with excitement. You did it! Lucy exclaimed, hugging Jake impulsively. That was amazing. Will clapped him on the shoulder. You showed them all, man. No one will ever doubt you, or Thunder again. Jake smiled, the enormity of what had just happened beginning to sink in. He turned to his uncle, uncertainty creeping back. Uncle Frank, I'm sorry I ran away. I just couldn't let Thunder be sold to Blackwood. Frank sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. I know, Jake. I should have listened to you from the start. These past weeks, well, they've given me a lot of time to think about the mistakes I've been making. Not just with the horse, but with you too. Before Jake could respond, Victor Reynolds approached, his expression unreadable. The group tensed, preparing for another confrontation. The boy has a gift, Reynolds said abruptly, addressing no one in particular. I've never seen anything like what I witnessed today. He turned to Jake, eyes narrowed in assessment. You made me look like a fool, showing that Thunder could be trained after I declared him impossible. Jake swallowed hard. That wasn't my intention, sir. I just wanted to save him. Reynolds studied him for a long moment, then looked at Thunder, who stood calmly beside Jake, showing no sign of the fear or aggression that had characterized their previous relationship. Perhaps, Reynolds said slowly, we could come to an arrangement that benefits everyone involved. A tense silence followed Reynolds' words. Jake instinctively placed a protective hand on Thunder's neck, feeling the stallion's steady pulse beneath his fingers. Whatever arrangement Reynolds had in mind, Jake was determined not to let it separate him from Thunder. I'm listening, Uncle Frank said cautiously, moving slightly closer to Jake in a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the boy. Reynolds adjusted his expensive suit jacket, his businessman's mind clearly calculating possibilities. Harrison, you own the horse now, but you're in financial trouble. Everyone knows that. I'm prepared to buy Thunder back from you for 3 times what you paid me. Jake's heart sank. Even with the accusations against Blackwood, Reynolds was still only interested in possessing Thunder, treating him like a commodity rather than a living being with feelings and needs. No deal, Uncle Frank said firmly, surprising Jake. Thunder stays with us. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. You need the money, Harrison. Don't be foolish out of pride. It's not about pride, Frank replied. It's about doing what's right for once. The horse stays with Jake. Mrs. Bennett stepped forward, her commanding presence drawing Reynolds' attention. If I may, Mr. Reynolds, I believe there might be an arrangement that truly benefits everyone, including Thunder. All eyes turned to her expectantly. Your interest in Thunder is understandable. He's a remarkable animal with exceptional bloodlines, Mrs. Bennett continued. But what truly makes him valuable now isn't his pedigree, but what Jake has accomplished with him. That partnership is unique. Reynolds frowned slightly. Your point? My point is that Thunder's real value now lies in his potential as a demonstration horse and in Jake's gift as a trainer, Mrs. Bennett explained. What if, instead of selling Thunder, you invested in that potential? Understanding dawned on Reynolds's face. You're suggesting a business arrangement. Precisely, Mrs. Bennet nodded. Sponsor Jake and Thunder. Fund their training and development. They could perform at equestrian events, give demonstrations of natural horsemanship techniques. It would restore your reputation in the horse community, not as the man who gave up on an untamable horse, but as the visionary who recognized and supported extraordinary talent. Jake held his breath, watching the calculations play out across Reynolds's face. The businessman was clearly intrigued by the proposal. Jake would retain primary care of Thunder, Mrs. Bennet added firmly. That's non-negotiable. But you would have the prestige of association and potentially a very profitable venture. Uncle Frank looked uncertain. I don't know about turning the boy into some kind of circus act. Not a circus act, Ellie interjected. A professional demonstration rider. It's a respected career in the equestrian world. And Jake could still go to school, still have a normal life, Mrs. Bennet assured Frank. This would be a part-time commitment, building toward a future career if he chooses it. Jake found his voice at last. What about Thunder? Would he stay with us? At our farm? Reynolds hesitated, then nodded slowly. I suppose that could work, provided you have adequate facilities for his care. Uncle Frank cleared his throat awkwardly. Our facilities aren't exactly up to your standards, Reynolds. That would be part of the investment, Mrs. Bennet suggested smoothly, improving the Harrison farm to properly house and train a performance horse. The discussion continued, the adults negotiating details while Jake stood beside Thunder, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. Will and Lucy watched wide-eyed from the sidelines, occasionally exchanging disbelieving glances. Finally, Reynolds extended his hand to Uncle Frank. We have a preliminary agreement then. My lawyers will draw up the paperwork. In the meantime, the horse stays with your nephew. As they shook hands, Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Thunder was safe. They would stay together. And somehow, his impulsive act of rescue had transformed into an opportunity beyond anything he could have imagined. The rest of the festival day passed in a blur. Jake and Thunder were awarded first place in the Liberty class, to thunderous applause from the crowd. News of the dramatic confrontation had spread throughout the fairgrounds, and people gathered to catch a glimpse of the boy who had tamed the untamable horse. By late afternoon, exhaustion had caught up with Jake. The adrenaline that had carried him through the morning was fading, leaving him drained but content. Thunder, too, seemed ready for a quieter environment after the excitement of the festival. Let's go home, Uncle Frank said, the word home carrying new meaning for both of them. They loaded Thunder into Mrs. Bennet's trailer for the journey back to the Harrison farm. As they drove away from the fairgrounds, Jake caught a glimpse of Sheriff Miller escorting Blackwood to her patrol car, his face ashen with fury and defeat. What will happen to him? Jake asked. Uncle Frank sighed. Hard to say. The sheriff's been building a case against him for months, apparently. Your situation just brought things to a head. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble, Jake said quietly. His uncle's weathered hand came to rest briefly on his shoulder. You stood up for what you believed in, Jake. That's never trouble. I should have done the same, long before now. The simple acknowledgement meant more to Jake than any elaborate apology could have. For the first time since his parents' death, he felt truly seen by his uncle. When they arrived at the farm, Jake led Thunder to his old stall, which suddenly seemed inadequate after everything they'd been through. The stallion, however, showed no dissatisfaction, settling in with calm acceptance of his surroundings. We'll fix this place up, Uncle Frank promised, surveying the barn with a critical eye. Make it worthy of a champion. Thunder doesn't care about fancy stables, Jake replied, stroking the horse's nose. He just wants to be treated with respect. Frank nodded thoughtfully. Maybe there's a lesson in that for all of us. In the days that followed, changes began to unfold at the Harrison farm. Reynolds, true to his word, sent contractors to assess the barn and paddocks for necessary improvements. Uncle Frank, energized by the new direction, threw himself into clearing years of accumulated junk and neglect from the property. Jake divided his time between school, which he had reluctantly returned to, and working with Thunder. Word of their story had spread throughout Riverdale County and beyond, bringing curious visitors to the farm to witness the special bond between boy and horse. Mrs. Bennett became a regular presence, providing guidance on Thunder's training regime and Jake's development as a horseman. She recognized in Jake a natural talent that went beyond his connection with Thunder, a rare intuitive understanding of equine psychology that could make him an exceptional trainer. "You have a gift," she told him one afternoon as they watched Thunder galloping freely in the newly fenced paddock. "What you did with Thunder wasn't luck or coincidence. You saw something in him that everyone else missed." Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just treated him like I'd want to be treated if I was scared and confused." "Exactly," Mrs. Bennett smiled. "Empathy, the foundation of all true horsemanship, and the quality most lacking in traditional training methods." On a crisp Saturday morning 2 weeks after the festival, a sleek car pulled into the Harrison driveway. Victor Reynolds emerged, accompanied by a tall, elegant woman who introduced herself as Diana Winters, a representative from the Equestrian Federation. "I've heard remarkable things about you and your horse," Diana told Jake, her professional demeanor softening as Thunder approached the fence to greet them. "Mr. Reynolds has been quite insistent that I see your work firsthand." Under the watchful eyes of the adults, Jake led Thunder through a series of liberty exercises even more complex than what they'd performed at the festival. The stallion responded to Jake's subtle cues with grace and precision, the joy in his movement evident to all observers. When they finished, Diana's expression was one of undisguised admiration. "Extraordinary, truly extraordinary. Mr. Reynolds wasn't exaggerating." She turned to Jake, who stood beside Thunder, both of them slightly winded from the exertion. "There's a junior natural horsemanship exhibition in Lexington next month. We'd like to invite you to participate as a special guest demonstrator." Jake's eyes widened. "Lexington, Kentucky?" Diana nodded, smiling at his astonishment. "It would be your first official appearance under Mr. Reynolds' sponsorship, with all expenses covered by the Federation." The opportunity was beyond anything Jake had dared to hope for. He looked to Uncle Frank, seeking his approval. Frank, who once would have dismissed such things as impractical dreams, now nodded encouragingly. "You've earned it, Jake. Both of you have." That evening, after the visitors had departed, Jake sat on the top rail of the paddock fence, watching Thunder graze in the golden light of sunset. The past month had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. From an unwanted boy and an untamable horse, they had become something else entirely. Partners, performers, proof of what patience and understanding could achieve. "We did it, Thunder," Jake whispered, though the horse was too far away to hear. "We showed them all." As if sensing Jake's thoughts, Thunder raised his head from the grass, looking directly at the boy. For a moment, they gazed at each other across the paddock, their connection as tangible as if they were connected by a physical thread. Then Thunder did something that made Jake's heart soar. He trotted directly to where Jake sat, without being called, and gently rested his head against the boy's knee in a gesture of pure trust and affection. What Jake couldn't know, as he sat stroking the velvet nose of the horse everyone had deemed impossible to tame, was that their journey was just beginning. The invitation to Lexington was only the first of many that would come their way, opening doors to a future neither could have imagined on that fateful day when Jake had first pushed open the barn door and met the eyes of a frightened, misunderstood stallion. But that future, with all its adventures and challenges, was still to come. For now, in the quiet evening at the Harrison farm, it was enough that boy and horse had found in each other exactly what they both needed most: someone who believed in them when no one else would. The Kentucky Horse Park in Lexington was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Sprawling across over 1,000 acres, it featured immaculate barns, pristine arenas, and manicured grounds that seemed to stretch endlessly. As their truck and trailer pulled through the imposing entrance gates, Jake pressed his face against the window, taking in the sight of the world-famous equestrian facility. "Impressed?" Uncle Frank asked, a hint of amusement in his voice as he navigated the vehicle toward the exhibition area. "It's huge," Jake breathed. "Do you think Thunder will be okay here? It's so different from home." In the month since the Founders' Day festival, Jake had thrown himself into preparation for this exhibition. Mrs. Bennett had coached him 3 times a week, refining his techniques and helping him develop a routine that would showcase Thunder's transformation. Victor Reynolds had kept his word, providing the resources needed to improve the Harrison farm and supplying Jake with proper attire for his performance, custom-tailored riding clothes that felt strangely formal compared to his usual jeans and t-shirts. "Thunder will be fine as long as you're with him," Frank assured him. "That horse would follow you through fire." They parked near the designated stabling area, where an official with a clipboard directed them to Thunder's assigned stall. Jake immediately went to the trailer to check on the stallion, who had traveled remarkably well despite the long journey. Thunder greeted him with a soft nicker, seeming more curious than anxious about his new surroundings. As they led Thunder to his stall, Jake couldn't help noticing the sidelong glances and whispers from other participants. Word had spread about the boy who had tamed the infamous stallion, and they were an object of curiosity. "Jake Harrison?" a voice called out. Jake turned to see Diana Winters approaching, her professional attire as impeccable as it had been during her visit to the farm. She was accompanied by a cameraman and what appeared to be a reporter. "I'm so glad you arrived safely," she said warmly. "The exhibition committee is thrilled to have you and Thunder participating. This is Martin Lee from Equestrian Today. He'd like to do a brief interview, if you're comfortable with that." Jake looked uncertainly at Uncle Frank, who nodded encouragingly. "Just be yourself, Jake." The interview was mercifully brief, with Martin asking about Jake's background, his techniques with Thunder, and what he hoped to demonstrate at the exhibition. Jake answered honestly, explaining that he had no formal training, just a belief that patience and understanding could reach even the most troubled horse. "People were quick to label Thunder as dangerous or untamable," Jake explained, stroking the stallion's neck as they stood outside his stall. "But they never asked why he was behaving that way. He was scared and confused, not mean." Martin seemed genuinely interested, not just in the sensational aspects of the story, but in Jake's philosophy of horsemanship. "So you believe there's no such thing as a bad horse?" Jake considered this. "I believe horses, like people, respond to how they're treated. Show them respect and patience, and most will give you trust in return." After the interview, Jake settled Thunder into his stall, making sure he had fresh water and hay. The stallion seemed content, watching the bustling activity of the stabling area with alert interest rather than his former fear. "There you are," called a familiar voice. Jake turned to see Ellie hurrying toward them, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat braid. She had arrived in Lexington a day earlier with Mrs. Bennett, who had several former students participating in the exhibition. "We were starting to worry you'd gotten lost," Ellie said, giving Jake a quick hug that made him blush. "How was the drive? How's Thunder handling everything?" "He's doing great," Jake replied, grateful for her friendly face among the sea of strangers. "Better than I am, actually. This place is intimidating." Ellie smiled sympathetically. "I felt the same way my first time here, but you'll get used to it. Come on, Mrs. Bennett wants to show you the arena where you'll be performing tomorrow." As they walked through the horse park, Jake took in the sights of world-class equestrians practicing their crafts, dressage riders executing precise movements, jumpers soaring over colorful obstacles, and Western performers demonstrating lightning-fast maneuvers. "Everyone here is so good," Jake murmured, a knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. "What if we don't measure up?" "Don't think like that," Ellie admonished gently. "What you and Thunder have is special. It's different from technical perfection. It's about connection. That's what people want to see." The main indoor arena where Jake would perform was enormous, with seating for thousands of spectators. The pristine sand footing, the professional lighting, the sheer scale of it all, Jake felt suddenly very small and very unprepared. Mrs. Bennett was waiting for them at the entrance to the arena. She noted Jake's wide-eyed expression and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Breathe, Jake. It's just a bigger version of our ring at home. The principles are the same. They spent an hour going over the logistics, where Jake would enter with Thunder, the timing of his routine, the protocol for the exhibition. Mrs. Bennett had arranged for Jake to have a brief practice session in the arena that evening, after the day's scheduled events had concluded. Get Thunder comfortable with the space, she advised. Let him explore, get used to the sights and sounds. The more familiar it feels tomorrow, the better you'll both perform. That evening, when the spectator seats were empty and the arena was quiet, Jake led Thunder into the vast space. The stallion's hooves made soft thuds in the carefully groomed sand as he took in his new surroundings, ears pricked forward with interest. Jake unclipped the lead rope, allowing Thunder to move freely around the arena. The stallion stayed close at first, then gradually ventured further, exploring the perimeter and occasionally looking back as if to ensure Jake was still there. That's it, boy, Jake encouraged. Get comfortable. Tomorrow we show everyone what you can do. As Thunder became more relaxed, Jake began to run through elements of their routine: the liberty work, the communication through subtle gestures, the trust exercises that had so impressed the crowd at the Founders' Day festival. Thunder responded beautifully, his movements fluid and confident despite the unfamiliar environment. From the shadows of the entrance, Victor Reynolds watched silently. He had arrived in Lexington that afternoon and had come to the arena specifically to observe Jake's practice session. What he saw both confirmed and exceeded his expectations. The boy had a gift. There was no denying it. The way Thunder responded to him, the subtle communication between them, the absolute trust the stallion displayed, it was remarkable. Reynolds had sponsored many equestrians over the years, but none with Jake's natural intuition and empathy. When Jake and Thunder finished their practice, Reynolds stepped forward, slow applause echoing in the empty arena. Jake turned, startled by the unexpected audience. "Mr. Reynolds, I didn't know you were here." "I arrived this afternoon," Reynolds replied, approaching with measured steps. "I wanted to see how you were adjusting to the venue." Jake stroked Thunder's neck, drawing comfort from the horse's solid presence. His relationship with Reynolds remained somewhat tentative, a business arrangement rather than a true mentorship. "We're doing okay, I think. Thunder seems comfortable." Reynolds nodded, his assessing gaze moving between boy and horse. "More than comfortable. He looks confident. Ready." He paused, then added with uncharacteristic sincerity, "You've done exceptional work with him, Jake." The unexpected praise brought a flush of pride to Jake's cheeks. "Thank you, sir." "There will be talent scouts here tomorrow," Reynolds continued. "Representatives from major equestrian programs, potential sponsors. This could be a significant opportunity for your future." The implication was clear. Reynolds expected Jake to impress these important contacts, to justify his investment. The pressure, which Jake had momentarily forgotten in the joy of working with Thunder, came rushing back. "I'll do my best," he promised, trying to keep the anxiety from his voice. Reynolds studied him for a moment, then said something unexpected. "Just do what you did at the festival, Jake. Show them the truth about Thunder, and about yourself. That will be enough." With a brief nod, Reynolds turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Jake breathed deeply, trying to process the encounter. Thunder nudged his shoulder gently, as if sensing his tension. "It's okay, boy," Jake whispered, leaning against the stallion's strong neck. "We've got this. Together." Later that night, back in the hotel room he shared with Uncle Frank, Jake found it hard to sleep. His mind kept replaying worst-case scenarios, Thunder spooking at the crowd, forgetting their routine, the audience's disappointment, Reynolds's disapproval. "Can't sleep?" Frank asked, his voice rumbling through the darkness. Jake sighed. "I'm nervous about tomorrow." The bed creaked as Frank sat up and switched on the bedside lamp. His face, usually weathered into stoic lines, softened with understanding. "That's normal, Jake. Everyone gets nervous before something important. What if I mess up? What if I let everyone down? Mrs. Bennett? Mr. Reynolds? You?" Frank was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. You know, when your mother, my sister, was your age, she used to get terrible stage fright before piano recitals. Jake sat up, surprised. His uncle rarely spoke about his mother. She did? Frank nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. Terrible. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. But the minute she sat down at that piano, everything changed. She became someone else. Confident, radiant. The nerves just disappeared. What made the difference? Jake asked. She loved it, Frank said simply. The love was stronger than the fear. And Jake, I've seen how you are with Thunder. That connection, that love, it's stronger than any nerves. Jake absorbed this, finding comfort in both the advice and the rare glimpse into his mother's life. Thanks, Uncle Frank. Frank cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious about the unusual heart-to-heart. Get some sleep now. Big day tomorrow. As Jake settled back under the covers, he held onto his uncle's words. The love was stronger than the fear. It was true with Thunder. Whenever worry or doubt crept in, Jake only had to look into those trusting dark eyes to find his courage again. Tomorrow would be their biggest challenge yet, but they would face it as they had faced everything else. Together. Morning broke over the Kentucky Horse Park, the rising sun casting long shadows across the immaculately maintained grounds. Jake had been awake since dawn, too keyed up to sleep any longer. He'd slipped out of the hotel room while Uncle Frank still snored softly, heading to the stables to check on Thunder. The exhibition complex was already humming with activity despite the early hour. Grooms led sleek, well-bred horses to morning workouts, trainers consulted clipboards and schedules, and vendors prepared their booths for the day's crowds. Jake made his way to Thunder's stall, nodding politely to the other exhibitors he passed. Thunder nickered in greeting when Jake appeared, pushing his nose against the boy's shoulder in a familiar gesture of affection. Jake checked the stallion's water and hay, then spent a few minutes simply grooming him, the rhythmic strokes of the brush calming both horse and boy. Today's the big day, Thunder, Jake murmured. But it's just you and me out there, same as always. As he worked, Jake became aware of a small audience gathering. Several young riders, probably participants in the junior competition, had stopped to watch him with Thunder. They whispered among themselves, casting curious glances his way. Finally, one girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, stepped forward. "Is it true that your horse used to be dangerous?" she asked, her voice carrying the slight twang of a southern accent. Jake smiled, continuing to brush Thunder's gleaming coat. People thought he was dangerous, but he was really just misunderstood. "How did you make him not scared anymore?" another child asked. Jake considered the question, aware that his answer mattered to these young equestrians. "I didn't force him to trust me. I gave him time and showed him I could be trusted." "Can I pet him?" the first girl asked hopefully. Normally, Jake would have been cautious about letting strangers approach Thunder, but the stallion's ears were forward, his expression curious rather than anxious. Jake nodded, showing the children how to offer their hands for Thunder to sniff before gently touching his neck. Thunder stood calmly, accepting the attention with dignified patience. Watching him interact so peacefully with the children, Jake felt a surge of pride so intense it brought a lump to his throat. How far they had both come from that first meeting in Uncle Frank's dilapidated barn. "Jake, there you are," Ellie's voice called from the end of the aisle. She hurried toward him, her face flushed with excitement. "The schedule's been adjusted. Your demonstration's been moved to right before the lunch break. It's the featured exhibition of the morning session." Jake's stomach did a nervous flip. "That's a prime spot." "Mrs. Bennett pulled some strings," Ellie explained. "She wanted to make sure you got the audience you deserve." The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Jake forced himself to eat breakfast, knowing he'd need the energy, while Uncle Frank, surprisingly attentive, ensured that Jake's exhibition outfit was properly pressed and that all of Thunder's grooming supplies were organized. By mid-morning, the exhibition center was packed with spectators. Jake peeked out from the preparation area at the crowded stands, his heart racing at the sight of so many people. Among them, he spotted Will and Lucy, who had made the trip to Kentucky with Mrs. Bennett, sitting beside Uncle Frank in the front section. Even Mac, the gruff farmhand, had made the journey, though he looked thoroughly uncomfortable in his clean shirt and pressed jeans. Victor Reynolds had reserved a special box seat, where he entertained what appeared to be important guests, elegantly dressed men and women who studied the proceedings with critical eyes. Jake recognized Diana Winters among them, along with representatives from several prestigious equestrian programs. 10 minutes, Jake, Mrs. Bennett announced, appearing at his side. She looked elegant and professional in a tailored blazer, her silver hair neatly styled. How are you feeling? Nervous, Jake admitted. There are so many people. Mrs. Bennett squeezed his shoulder gently. Focus on Thunder. Remember what you've accomplished together. The audience will respond to that authenticity. It's what makes your demonstration special. Jake nodded, drawing a deep breath. We're ready. As the previous exhibition concluded and the announcer's voice echoed through the arena introducing the remarkable story of Jake Harrison and Thunder, Jake led the stallion to the entrance gate. Thunder seemed to sense the importance of the moment, his steps measured and dignified, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian under the arena lights. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer continued, what you are about to witness is not the result of traditional training methods, but of patience, understanding, and an extraordinary bond between a boy and a horse once deemed untamable. Please welcome Jake Harrison and Thunder. Jake's legs felt like jelly as he walked beside Thunder into the vast arena, the sand soft beneath their feet. The applause that greeted them was polite but reserved. This sophisticated audience was waiting to be impressed, not ready to bestow approval based on an introduction alone. For a moment, the scale of the arena and the sea of watching faces threatened to overwhelm Jake. Then he remembered Uncle Frank's words from the night before. The love was stronger than the fear. Jake looked at Thunder, at those trusting dark eyes that had once been filled with terror, and found his center again. With a deep breath, Jake unclipped the lead rope from Thunder's halter. Then, in a gesture that drew a collective gasp from the audience, he removed the halter entirely, leaving Thunder completely free. The stallion stood perfectly still, his attention focused solely on Jake. The arena fell silent, spectators leaning forward in their seats, many expecting the infamous horse to bolt or display the aggression that had made him a legend. Instead, Jake began to move slowly across the sand, and Thunder followed, matching his pace step for step without any physical cue. When Jake stopped, Thunder stopped. When Jake turned, Thunder turned. It was like watching a dance where the partners were connected by invisible threads. Jake increased the distance between them, moving to the center of the arena while Thunder remained at the perimeter. With subtle hand signals that were almost imperceptible to the audience, Jake guided the stallion through a series of patterns, circles, figure eights, lateral movements, all performed with fluid grace. The crowd's silence had transformed from skepticism to awe. In the Reynolds box, Victor leaned forward, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth as his guests murmured appreciatively. Now came the more complex elements of their routine. Jake raised his hand, and Thunder executed a perfect Spanish walk across the arena, lifting each foreleg high with exaggerated precision. Another signal, and the stallion performed a series of flying lead changes, switching the leading leg with each stride in a movement that showcased both athletic ability and mental focus. For the finale, Jake knelt in the center of the arena, extending his arms. Thunder cantered toward him, 1,000 pounds of power and momentum, then slowed to a collected trot, a walk, and finally stopped just inches from Jake's kneeling form. With delicate care, the stallion lowered his head, resting his muzzle on Jake's shoulder in a tableau of absolute trust. The silence held for a heartbeat, then two. Then the arena erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, cheering and whistling. In the Reynolds box, the distinguished guests were standing, their reserved demeanor forgotten in the face of what they had witnessed. Jake rose, his hand coming to rest on Thunder's neck, and took a simple bow. The stallion, as if understanding his role in the performance, dipped his head as well, eliciting another wave of applause. As they exited the arena, Jake felt lightheaded with relief and joy. They had done it. They had shown the elite equestrian world what was possible when horsemanship was based on partnership rather than dominance. In the preparation area, Uncle Frank was waiting, his weathered face split by an uncharacteristic grin. Without a word, he pulled Jake into a rough embrace. "Your parents would be so proud," he said gruffly. When he pulled back, Jake was shocked to see moisture in his uncle's eyes. "I know I am." Before Jake could respond, they were surrounded by well-wishers. Mrs. Bennett was beaming, Ellie was practically bouncing with excitement, and Will and Lucy were talking over each other in their eagerness to congratulate him. That was unbelievable. "Did you see everyone's faces when you took off the halter? You're going to be famous." Even Mac, awkward in his clean clothes, shuffled forward to pat Jake's shoulder. "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all." As the initial excitement began to settle, Diana Winters approached, accompanied by several of the guests from the Reynolds box. "Jake, that was extraordinary," she said warmly. "I'd like to introduce you to some people who are very interested in your work with Thunder." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions and conversations that made Jake's head spin. There was the director of a prestigious natural horsemanship program, who offered Jake a scholarship for the following summer. A representative from an equine therapy foundation who wanted to discuss how Jake's methods might help traumatized horses. A publisher interested in a book about Jake and Thunder's journey. Through it all, Thunder stood calmly beside Jake, occasionally nudging him gently as if to say, "We did this together." Victor Reynolds was the last to approach, his expression unreadable as always. The businessman surveyed Jake and Thunder for a long moment before speaking. "You exceeded my expectations today," he said finally. "Every person in my box has approached me about your future. Offers of sponsorship, training opportunities, even a documentary. It seems our arrangement has potential beyond what either of us anticipated." Jake nodded, still processing the overwhelming response to their performance. "Thank you for believing in us enough to make this possible." Reynolds waved away the gratitude. "I recognized a good investment, but I'll admit, what you and Thunder have achieved goes beyond business. It's..." He seemed to search for the right word. "Special." Coming from the normally reserved businessman, it was high praise indeed. As the afternoon progressed, Jake found a quiet moment to slip away with Thunder, seeking a brief respite from the constant attention. They found a peaceful spot beneath a sprawling oak tree, far from the bustle of the exhibition center. Sitting on the grass with Thunder grazing contentedly nearby, Jake reflected on the whirlwind journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate midnight escape to national recognition in just a few short weeks, it seemed almost impossible to believe. Yet the most meaningful transformation wasn't the external success or recognition. It was the change in Thunder himself, from a frightened, defensive animal to a confident partner. And perhaps equally significant was the change in Jake, from a quiet, overlooked boy to someone who had found his voice and his purpose. "We did it, boy," Jake murmured, as Thunder raised his head to gaze at him with those intelligent eyes. "We proved them all wrong." Thunder nickered softly and stepped closer, lowering his magnificent head to rest against Jake's shoulder, not as part of a performance now, but as a genuine gesture of affection between two beings who had saved each other. What the future held, the opportunities, the challenges, the adventures that awaited them, would unfold in its own time. For now, this moment of quiet connection was enough. Boy and horse, united by trust, having shown the world what was possible when you looked beyond appearances and labels to the heart beneath. As the afternoon sun filtered through the oak leaves, casting dappled shadows across them both, Jake made a silent promise to Thunder and to himself. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with the same patience, trust, and understanding that had brought them to this triumphant day. 6 months after the Kentucky exhibition, the Harrison farm was barely recognizable. The once dilapidated barn had been rebuilt with spacious airy stalls and a covered training arena for use during inclement weather. The fields, previously overgrown and neglected, were now properly fenced and divided into well-maintained paddocks where several horses grazed contentedly. The centerpiece of the property was a round pen specifically designed for liberty work, where Jake could often be found working with Thunder and, increasingly, with other horses that were brought to him for training. A modest sign at the entrance to the driveway read, "Harrison Natural Horsemanship," with a silhouette of a boy and horse that everyone in the county now recognized. On this particular Saturday morning, Jake stood in the center of the round pen, watching as Thunder demonstrated a perfect piaffe, a highly collected trot in place that was typically seen in advanced dressage. The stallion had taken to classical training with the same intelligence and willingness he showed in liberty work, expanding his repertoire of skills under Jake's patient guidance. "Beautiful," Mrs. Bennett commented from her position at the rail. Now a regular visitor to the farm, she had become a mentor to Jake, helping him develop his natural abilities into a structured training approach. "His collection is improving every week." Jake smiled, sending Thunder into a relaxed walk with a subtle gesture. "He seems to enjoy the precision work. Gives him something to think about." Mrs. Bennett nodded appreciatively. "The mark of a good training program. It engages the horse's mind as well as his body." They were interrupted by the sound of vehicles coming up the driveway. Jake recognized Uncle Frank's truck, returning from town where he had gone to pick up supplies, but there were several other cars behind it. The Saturday visitors arriving for Jake's weekly demonstration. What had begun as informal gatherings of curious locals had evolved into scheduled events that drew people from neighboring states. Every Saturday at noon, Jake and Thunder would demonstrate natural horsemanship techniques, showing the audience the power of patience, clear communication, and mutual respect in horse training. The suggested donation of $10 per person had become a reliable source of income for the previously struggling farm. "Looks like a good turnout today," Mrs. Bennett observed as they watched people parking and making their way toward the viewing area adjacent to the round pen. Jake nodded, giving Thunder a final pat before leading him to the small paddock where he would rest until the demonstration. Uncle Frank said the website got a lot of traffic after that article came out in Equestrian Monthly. The article, a 6-page feature on the boy who tamed Thunder, had propelled Jake's reputation beyond the local community to the wider equestrian world. It told the story of their journey from that first meeting in the barn to their triumph in Kentucky, complete with professional photographs of Jake and Thunder in action. The magazine's editor had called it one of their most popular issues in years. After settling Thunder in the paddock, Jake joined Uncle Frank at the entrance to the viewing area, where his uncle was collecting donations and handing out information sheets about natural horsemanship. "Big crowd today," Frank commented, nodding toward the filling seats. "Lots of new faces." Jake noticed several horse trailers among the parked vehicles. "Looks like some folks brought their own horses, too." 3 training inquiries already, Frank confirmed. "Plus, someone from that therapeutic riding center in Louisville wants to talk to you about their program." The change in Uncle Frank over the past months had been almost as remarkable as Thunder's transformation. Gone was the defeated, bitter man drowning his problems in whiskey. In his place was someone engaged, purposeful, and increasingly knowledgeable about the business they were building together. He hadn't touched alcohol since the day of the Founders' Day festival, finding in their new venture the purpose he'd been missing since his wife's death. The Harrison farm's finances, once a source of constant stress, had stabilized thanks to a combination of Reynolds' sponsorship, income from the demonstrations, and the growing training business. They weren't rich by any means, but the bills were paid on time, and there was even talk of hiring additional help as demand for Jake's services increased. As noon approached, Jake returned to the round pen while Uncle Frank addressed the gathered crowd, welcoming them to the farm and introducing the demonstration. Among the audience, Jake spotted several familiar faces, Will and Lucy in their usual spots up front, Ellie, who now helped with the training program when she wasn't studying equine science at the local community college, and Mac, who had transitioned from occasional hired hand to full-time farm manager. There were also some unexpected visitors today. Victor Reynolds sat in the back row, accompanied by Diana Winters, and several well-dressed individuals who Jake didn't recognize. Reynolds caught Jake's eye and nodded in acknowledgement, his expression as inscrutable as ever. Uncle Frank concluded his introduction, and the audience applauded as Jake entered the round pen. Thunder, waiting at the gate, trotted in after him without halter or lead rope, moving with the confident grace that had become his hallmark. "Good afternoon, everyone," Jake began, his voice stronger and more assured than it had been 6 months ago. Public speaking had become easier with practice. "Today, Thunder and I want to show you what's possible when horse training is based on partnership rather than dominance." For the next hour, Jake demonstrated the principles and techniques of natural horsemanship, explaining each step as Thunder responded to subtle cues and requests. They showed basic liberty work, then moved to more advanced maneuvers, including the classical dressage movements Thunder had been learning. Throughout it all, the bond between boy and horse was evident in every interaction, every response, every moment of communication. "The most important thing to understand," Jake explained as the demonstration neared its conclusion, "is that this isn't about special talent or secret techniques. It's about patience, consistency, and respect. Every horse is capable of this kind of partnership, if given the chance." To illustrate his point, Jake invited a volunteer from the audience, a woman who had brought her nervous, head-tossing mare for evaluation. Using the same calm, methodical approach he had developed with Thunder, Jake showed how to begin building trust, guiding the woman through the process while the audience watched in fascination. Within 20 minutes, the previously anxious mare was standing quietly, her head lowered, licking and chewing, signs of relaxation and acceptance. The transformation wasn't as dramatic as Thunder's, but it was enough to make the woman's eyes widen in disbelief, and the audience applaud spontaneously. "Every horse has its own timeline," Jake reminded them. "Thunder and I have been working together for months. What you're seeing today is the result of consistent work and mutual trust that developed over time." As the demonstration concluded and the audience began to disperse, many people lingered to ask questions or to schedule training consultations. Jake noticed Victor Reynolds remaining in his seat, apparently in no hurry to leave. After addressing the most pressing inquiries and asking Ellie to handle the training schedule, Jake made his way to where Reynolds waited. The businessman rose as Jake approached, introducing his companions, representatives from a major equestrian equipment manufacturer interested in sponsorship opportunities. "They were impressed," Reynolds said, with his characteristic economy of words. "As was I. Your program has evolved significantly." Jake nodded, accepting the rare compliment. "We've been working hard. The sponsorship has made a huge difference in what we can accomplish here." Reynolds gestured to the rebuilt facilities, the new equipment, the healthy horses in the paddocks. "A good investment, it seems, for both of us." After Reynolds and his guests departed, Jake found himself alone in the round pen with Thunder. The stallion stood beside him, relaxed and content, occasionally nudging Jake's pocket where he knew treats were often kept. "You shameless beggar," Jake laughed, producing a carrot and offering it on his flat palm. Thunder accepted it delicately, his whiskers tickling Jake's hand. As the stallion crunched happily, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. It had begun with an impulsive act of rescue, a desperate attempt to save one horse from a fate Jake couldn't bear to contemplate. But it had grown into something much larger, a demonstration of what was possible when traditional assumptions were questioned and new approaches embraced. The impact extended beyond Thunder. Jake had now worked with dozens of horses, many considered problem cases by their owners, helping them overcome fear-based behaviors through patience and understanding. The Therapeutic Riding Center in Louisville had consulted with him on approaches for horses working with children with disabilities. Mrs. Bennett had incorporated elements of his methods into her teaching program. Most meaningful to Jake, however, was the change in how people in Riverdale County viewed their horses. The old approach of breaking a horse's spirit to achieve obedience was gradually giving way to methods that preserved the animal's dignity and built genuine partnership. It was a slow shift, but a significant one. "Jake," Uncle Frank called from the house. "Phone call from that publisher about the book proposal." The book, tentatively titled The Boy Who Listened, The Journey of Jake and Thunder, had been suggested by the publisher who approached Jake after the Kentucky exhibition. Initially reluctant, Jake had eventually agreed when he realized it could help spread the message of natural horsemanship to an even wider audience. "Coming," Jake called back. He gave Thunder a final pat and turned to leave the round pen. The stallion followed him to the gate unprompted, and Jake was struck once again by the miracle of their connection. From feared to fearless, from isolated to engaged, both of them had been transformed by their unlikely partnership. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant orange and pink, Jake sat on the porch of the farmhouse, a notebook open on his lap. He was sketching out ideas for the book, trying to articulate the principles that had guided his work with Thunder. The sound of hoofbeats made him look up. Thunder had managed to open his paddock gate again, a trick he had mastered weeks ago and employed whenever he felt social, and was trotting toward the house, his black coat gleaming in the fading light. "Escape artist," Jake called affectionately. "I'm going to have to get a combination lock for that gate." Thunder nickered in response, coming to stand by the porch steps. Jake set aside his notebook and went to the stallion, stroking his neck and checking that the paddock gate was merely open, not damaged. Finding everything in order except for Thunder's unauthorized outing, Jake decided to take advantage of the beautiful evening. "Want to go for a ride?" he asked. Thunder's ears pricked forward eagerly. Jake had begun riding him just a few months ago, starting with a bareback pad and simple hackamore, before gradually introducing a lightweight saddle and gentle bit. The stallion had accepted each new element with remarkable trust, seeming to understand that Jake would never ask anything of him that would cause fear or pain. Jake quickly fetched the bareback pad and hackamore, then swung onto Thunder's back with practiced ease. They set off down the farm lane toward the open fields beyond, moving in perfect harmony as the day's last light gilded the landscape in gold. As they cantered across a meadow, the wind in their faces and the rhythm of Thunder's hooves a steady drumbeat on the earth, Jake felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond words. This connection, this partnership, this trust, was what he had fought for, what he had believed in when everyone said it was impossible. They said a boy couldn't tame the untamable horse. They were right. Jake hadn't tamed Thunder. He had done something far more meaningful. He had shown him that the world could be a place of kindness rather than cruelty, of partnership rather than domination. And in doing so, he had not broken Thunder's spirit, but elevated it, allowing the stallion's true nature to emerge. In the end, that was the real miracle. Not that a boy had tamed a dangerous horse, but that a boy and a horse had found in each other exactly what they needed to become their best selves. And in that transformation, they had shown others a better way forward, a path of patience, understanding, and respect that could change not just one horse's life, but many. As twilight deepened around them, Jake and Thunder turned for home, silhouetted against the evening sky, the boy who believed and the horse who proved him right, united in a bond that had rewritten the impossible into reality.